What if there's a difference between I feel sad and I am sad? And it might change how you grieve. Hey friends, welcome to the Inner Spark podcast. I'm your host, Casey Tayton. If you're looking to hear stories of transformation and personal growth, this podcast is for you. My guest and I will be sharing those sparking moments that has changed them into living a more fulfilling, authentic life. I'm so excited for you to hear each unique story. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Hey friend, welcome back to the Inner Spark podcast. I'm your host, Casey Tayton. This is part of the series on grief, and today I have with me a very, very special person, Dr. Craig Farney. Hello, Dr. Farney.
Hello, Casey.
How are you?
Doing well. How about you?
I am great. I am so excited to have you here. We're just going to dive in. I just want to give the
Mm.
listeners a little bit of the reason why I asked you to come on and talk about grief in the series is you work with a lot of people that deal with grief. I mean, I believe we
Mhm.
all deal with grief in some way or another.
Right.
And you've personally helped me in my own life deal with grief. And so, will you tell them what you do?
I saw a phrase on a website the other day that I really like, and I think I'm going to kind of start going with this. It was called awareapy as opposed to therapy. And so I think I'm going to start calling myself an awareapist, which I want to be careful how I say that because it sounds too close to some other words, but that's really ultimately what I seek to do. I seek to help people become aware of subconscious and unconscious patterns, be it physiologic or psychologic, that impact their well-being. And so I tell people frequently it's difficult, if not impossible, to change that which you're not aware of. And so, really, in all that I do, that's the first thing I always seek to do is to create awareness of that which people are unaware of.
I love that new phrase, new
Uh-huh.
word. Um, will you tell them what does grief mean to you?
So, I personally think grief is one of the hardest emotions to deal with and to process. In fact, I find it interesting because one of my cousins, who he does a lot of missions work overseas, we were having a conversation one time and he said something that struck a chord with me. He said, "We weren't created to experience grief." So, whatever your belief system is, but if mankind was created in a garden and he was placed in this perfect place, it wasn't made to experience grief. So, I think sometimes grief is very difficult for people to process. But my own personal viewpoint of why I think grief is so hard outside, because my mom and I have this conversation. My dad's been gone almost 20 years now, and she still feels the pain of grief, even almost 20 years later. And there's an aspect where you just miss the person, you miss interacting with them. And I don't know that really ever goes away to a degree. I think the intensity just diminishes. But I think personally, one of the things I think that is so hard for grief is that there are no perfect relationships. And I think what happens is we have misunderstandings, hurt feelings, things that happen in a relationship that don't fully get dealt with or processed. And when a person passes, I think we feel this sense of, I'm never going to get a chance to make that right. And I think really, from my own personal experience, I think that's the hardest thing for grief is this sense of, I lost my chance to make things okay.
Yeah, that is good. Thank you for sharing that personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I love how you guys communicate about that. And that
Mm-hmm.
is why I am doing this series on grief because I feel like we don't talk about our feelings. And
Right.
especially, I think grief is one that is probably the most challenging thing because
Mm-hmm.
we don't normalize that it's okay to really be sad, really have
Mm-hmm.
those deep feelings in us, feel
Right.
lost, and there's a whole bunch of feelings you can attach with grief. I just
Mm-hmm.
think that in our world, we don't give people that permission to really speak that And
Right.
so people aren't comfortable speaking it. And so
Mhm.
that's why I think it's so important to me to have people come on and talk about grief, what it means to them, and
Mhm.
what they've experienced dealing with grief. And I
Mhm.
know feelings are a whole thing. So Dr. Farney
Right.
does a lot with feelings in general and how
Mhm.
they can do different things to our body. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So where I want to start when it comes to feelings, I think first of all, the biggest challenge is we're not really taught how to work through our feelings. Most of us grow up with you have an emotional outburst as a child, and the first response is be quiet, you know, knock that off, or I'll give you something to cry about, something along that lines. And I think that's part of the problem is emotions are a big part of our childhood. We're more emotional creatures than we are logical creatures. And if we're not taught how to work our way through these emotions, we carry that on into adulthood. So I think a couple things happens. You and I have talked a lot about the concept of having both an inner parent and an inner child. What then happens in our adulthood is we tend to parent ourselves the same way. We tell ourselves to knock it off. We try to stuff it or make it go away instead of really truly being able to work through the feelings itself because we never were taught that. And I think people experience that with grief a lot too. They'll be around somebody and they're like, okay, well, just get over it, move on. And it's if you're not taught how to process emotions to begin with, and now you're dealing with the hardest emotion there is, it takes years for people to work their way through it. And so I think it's something you can't rush through. And I think the hardest part too, I think we tend to want to just make feelings go away or try to prevent ourselves from feeling instead of actually just allowing ourselves to feel the feelings. And so I think that's part of the problem too, is we don't really allow ourselves to feel what we feel. Part of the reason that even occurs, it's not really even the feelings that are the issue, it's the behavior that follows it that we're really trying to stop. And so if we can learn how to be able to experience feelings and still choose our behavior, now feelings aren't as hard to work their way through because we're not really trying to stop the feeling. It's more the behavior that we're trying to stop. And that's kind of what I help people to work on. The other interesting piece with this too, because my mom and I have had lots of conversations about my dad's passing. And one of the things that we talked about is it's one thing to process the grief mentally, logically as the inner parent. It's another thing to process the emotion as the inner child. And those aren't the same things. And so sometimes you have to do both. Sometimes you have to go back and allow yourself to process an aspect of grief you didn't realize you didn't process.
Yeah. Will you talk about real fast, just explain the two between the inner child? Yeah. So people get understand
Inner
what that
parent,
means.
inner child,
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
There's a lot of different ways you can separate these. There's a lot of people that talk about the inner child work. What I don't hear a lot of is the inner parent aspect. And most people don't think about how you are parenting yourself. We grew up in a structure of I'm the child and I have this parent that tells me what to do and guides me. And then as we become adults, we take on that role with ourselves. And we're constantly, I call it a conversation, but really it's not really a conversation. We're more talking at ourselves than talking with ourselves. And so you're either the inner parent's either telling you what you should do, need to do, got to do, have to do, or the inner child's telling you what you want to do or what you desire. And so it's the two different parts of us. The inner parent, I think, is it's the logical part of us, it's the rational reasoning part of us. It's the one that has the wisdom and the guidance and is telling you what to do, whereas the inner child is the creative, joyful spark, to borrow a term from you, that just its ultimate goal is just to live and love life. And so when you live out of one or the other and not together, then neither extreme is good because either you're all logic and you don't really enjoy life, or you're all, just partying and not really being wise in your choices. So that's kind of what I see. I think the inner child is what we felt growing up. The inner parent is the wisdom that we learn over time. And so it's really the relationship of those two that I think is a big challenge point.
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. I think it can get confusing.
Oh, yeah. The other part you can tie into it too. I tell people the inner parent lives in your head, the inner child lives in your gut. When you
Yeah.
kind of have this gut feeling or this uneasiness in your gut, That's ultimately your inner child talking. When you have this kind of headache over processing, that's your inner parent over talking too much.
Thank you. I know you work with a lot of people. How do you see grief come up in people?
It's typically going to come up as a sadness. That's the most common of what people experience. The thing, though, too, is you can have anxiety or anger also be in there as well. Anger will be a protective aspect of, I don't want to feel sad. And so sometimes it's both protective and moving or motivating as well. I think sometimes anger comes up to try to get us to make changes or to move, whereas anxiety is a fear of, it's something about me that's creating this grief as opposed to it being something I'm experiencing. The most common is sadness. It's funny because I've learned to really watch people in their demeanor. It usually starts as there's this quiver that either happens in the chin or in the lips. It's like you can feel something just kind of bubbling up and welling up within you. And you can even see this sadness or this emptiness in somebody's eyes as well, that there's this loss that you can see in people's face. I've really learned to listen to their tone, the words they use, and their facial expressions. Humans weren't created to lie, and it's you have to really practice at it to be able to lie and get away with it because your body is going to fight against that.
Yeah. As you're dealing with this, most people, I'm assuming, don't just come out and say, I'm dealing with grief.
Right.
I believe that when we're feeling these feelings, emotions,
Mhm.
grief
Mhm.
being one of the biggest, one of the hardest,
Right.
it can play a huge impact on our body.
Absolutely.
How do you see this and how do you get people to really get that out?
So usually the starting point of the interaction is something physical. Either they're having gut issues, fatigue, sleep issues, some type of autoimmune something. And we start by going, okay, what's driving this? What's the physiologic, physical mechanism? I find we just start to have conversation. And one of the things that I usually drive people towards is, okay, whatever you're experiencing, when did it start? Because something changed when it started, something either physical, chemical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. And so, and it's funny because as I ask that questions, a lot of times their whole facial expression changes because I'll ask, okay, when did it start? Okay, what was going on around that time frame? And something within them already knows what's going on. It's just more to subconscious or unconscious level. And once it starts to bubble up into conscious awareness, it's like this thing starts to come out and their facial expression starts to change. Like I said, either they'll get kind of a quiver in their lip, their voice will get shaky, or they'll even well up with tears as well. Usually it's just as we're having conversation about how did you get here, that opens its way up. And sometimes it takes time too. Sometimes the initial emotion they're experiencing is anger. And so we work our way through going, okay, what are you actually mad at? I tend to take people through as we get into emotions. I ask three questions. What do you feel? Where do you feel? And why do you feel it? Because I'm ultimately wanting to drive towards what really is driving this thing. And then I've even added further into when did it start and what do you do with it? Or what if you weren't experiencing this?
Yeah, those three questions.
You love those
I,
questions.
absolutely. They're my favorite three. When people come into you, you work on the whole body.
Mhm.
And do you usually see it as an illness?
Think about what grief is. Grief is a heaviness, it's an overwhelming sensation. And so that's going to tend to have some effect either in the chest, where they just either their breathing is not as healthy as it could be, heart rates may be off, or blood pressure's off, or they can get into gut issues. They're going to be experiencing stress. So they're going to have some energy issues, maybe even some sleep issues as well. That's the most common thing I see.
Yeah, so people are coming into you with a dis-ease
Mhm.
in their
Yeah.
body and
I,
they just ultimately can't figure out what's happening.
as we talk about this too, I think the biggest problem gets back to what we talked about is if we're not taught how to process or work our way through emotions, it isn't that we experience grief, it's that people get stuck in grief and they don't work their way through it.
Yeah, that's good. I want to start with this. I think people often say grief is from death. I believe that grief can be from so many other areas in life. It's so big.
Yes.
And a lot of people just assume you only grieve someone when they're dying, when it can come with so many parts of our life.
Well, and you can take dying beyond to you can have death of a relationship, even
Yeah.
though they're still alive, which sometimes I think can even be harder. You have the death of a dream, you have the death of a career, a lot of those things that, yeah, you can grieve more than just somebody passing away. It can be a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I think it's just so interesting that we don't talk about this. So how would you say to someone that it's okay to feel it, or how would you tell people to start noticing it or becoming aware of it?
So we've already talked about the three questions, and in some essence, you already said it too. Number one, we start with awareness because I think over time, people tend to it kind of just it's like an alarm clock that's going off and it's there, but you start to tune it out. And so I think that's where it starts to have physiologic effects on you that you don't even always experience it as grief. You feel unmotivated or you just don't feel connected or you feel some bitterness or you start to have other things that are really just coming from this unprocessed grief. And so, we've talked about these three questions. What do you feel? Where do you feel it? And why do you feel it? That's the whole point of that, is to gain awareness. The other thing I tie in with that too is you said it this way, it's okay. Because what we tend to do, and I think this is even a bigger problem than the emotion itself, is we go, I feel angry and that's bad. Or I feel sad and that's bad. Or I feel anxious and that's bad. The feelings are not bad. They're just feelings and they're ultimately just information. I think it's when we say these are bad that it becomes a problem. That's when it's harder even to process it and to give yourself permission to feel it because you're trying to stop something that you perceive as bad. So when you can go, these aren't bad emotions, they're just emotions, then it becomes okay to just feel the feelings.
Yeah. I think that so many times, let's just use someone dying, for instance, that we have maybe felt the feelings of grief right then. I don't believe there's any timeline on grief. And I believe that grief can come in your life 2 years later, 10 years later, 15, you said 20 years later.
Right.
How would you still go back and ask yourself those three questions? Because if you're thinking 20 years went by and I'm doing okay, and then all of a sudden
Right.
I start feeling these things in my body that I'm just sad,
Right.
you would go back to those.
So this is where the two other questions come into play. And you also, we've talked through this too. So number one is once you get to what, where, why, when did you learn to feel this way? Because think about even grief itself. Where did you learn to grieve? Because if you in your lifetime never experienced death, never saw it, how would you know how to deal with it? So we've been intentionally or unconsciously taught how to grieve as well. Even in small areas like we talked about too, is if your parent had a friend that they had a falling out, how did your parent deal with that? Or if your parent had this dream that all of a sudden the dream went away or they never got to, how do they deal with that? I found something interesting as I've worked back through some of my own childhood thoughts, feelings, and belief. There's an aspect that I grieved part of my childhood because I grieved the fact that, well, if I didn't think and feel this way about myself, I could have done more. I could have been more. I could have experienced other things. And there was an aspect that I grieved that lost opportunity, for lack of a better term. So I think that's where sometimes it can hit you 20 years later is you don't realize the impact of something on you until you actually address it later on, or you have a trigger that brings that to the surface.
Yeah. As you've dealt with grief in your own life, and I mean, there's obviously many different ways you could talk about this. How have you helped yourself, besides asking yourself those questions? How have you dealt with it?
And the biggest thing is just allowing myself to feel. And in conjunction with it, part of what makes it powerful is being able to feel feelings and still choose behavior. Because again, I don't think it's the feelings that are the issue. I don't think nobody wants to feel grief, and yet it's appropriate if that makes, I talked about this too, is when somebody you care about passes away, it's appropriate to feel sad. That's not a bad thing. It's that if you allow that sadness to make you depressed and unmotivated and you stay in bed and you don't do anything, and now you just, because in some essence, you've died also.
Yeah.
You've allowed somebody else's passing to cause you to die. Even though you're physically alive, you're not really connected wise alive. And so I think it's if you can feel sadness and still go, I can still behave or choose the behaviors I desire, then I think that's a healthy processing because you're not taking on the grief as your identity, you're taking it on as an experience. And that's the biggest difference is if you start to, you said this, if somebody says, I am sad, that's an identity statement. Whereas if they say, I feel sad, that's an experience. And it's easier for experiences to pass than it is for identity to pass.
I think that part right there is really big. Identifying as like your identity
Right.
and allowing it to pass. So many of us, even going back to the basics, don't know how to feel our feelings. I think that more females are more willing to cry in public, more willing to
Right.
feel their feelings. Where I've said it, I'll use a funeral, for example, and I've looked at some men in my life and I'm like, whew, there's no tears. And I know there's no right or wrong way to feel it or show you're going through something. I think that when we see that when we're young, I know I saw that when I was young, that they didn't feel their feelings. How do you know that it's feelings, if that makes sense? Or help them understand. Some people don't even know what feelings are, if that makes sense. We know
Right.
happy, sad.
Right. You're also tying in now a cultural and a upbringing thing as well, because most guys grow up with the idea, be tough, don't cry. And so they're not really taught to express that. It's funny because I think one of the most powerful things is when you see an adult male cry in a healthy way. You can get on the other side of that too, where it's this guy's crying all the time. He's way oversensitive. When you have a strong masculine energy that is willing to be vulnerable and cry, I think that's very powerful. And so I think most guys are not taught that. And so they don't know how to. I think they're basically taught you have to just ignore your feelings and be tough and get things done. And women don't carry that. Women are almost expected to be emotional for, and so I think that it makes it easier. So I think for guys, yeah, it is harder. For guys, I look at one of two things: either look at their energy or look at their health. That's where they show their feelings, and that's why I think this is part of why guys die earlier because they're not taught how to process emotions, and I think they end up having major health issues earlier than women do because of that factor. I think you could even look at if they shut down as opposed to just their normal energy, that's another indicator that they're experiencing something. They're just trying to be in control. If they become overly controlling, that could be another indicator that they're experiencing something. They're trying to control their world to make that feeling go away. I personally found it very difficult to cry at my own dad's funeral because I don't think I was taught how to do that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's kind of where I can relate is watching my own father catches me off guard, not crying, and then I'm crying.
Right.
And so it's like, am I doing something wrong? Because I'm crying,
Right.
but these are his parents and he's not
Right.
crying.
Well, the farther back you go, the more and more you have that rugged masculine thing. Men don't cry. That's kind of the concept. And so men are basically taught to be unemotional. They're taught to bury their feelings and to just ignore it as best they can.
Is there anything else you would like to say about grief? There's so many ways you can take it, and you are a
Mhm.
person that works with feelings and health issues.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think it's so important to have this conversation with you. You've seen it and you're human. You've experienced it in your own life. And I thank you for sharing
Mhm.
that journey and just being honest and open about, I didn't cry.
Yeah. I found myself asking the same question. It's funny because you said, what is wrong with me for crying? I was asking it the other way. What is wrong with me for not crying? And this kind of ties back into what I said about I think why grief is so hard is because there's this sense of I'm never going to be able to make this relationship right. My dad was emotionally distant because that's what he experienced growing up. He did not have an emotionally healthy dad that could teach him how to express emotions and feel emotions and connect. And so he struggled with that. And so that's one of the things that to me never really got fully healed in my relationship with my dad while he was on earth. And so I think that's one of the things that made it difficult is this sense of I didn't feel like we were as healthy as I would have desired it to be. So I think there's even the hard part in grief sometimes too is I don't miss the fact of the emotional distance, if that sounds weird. And yet I miss my dad. And so I think that can become a conflict too, because the number one process of the body and the brain is protection. And especially if you get into, let's say somebody passes that was somewhat abusive, part of your brain is going to go, oh, it's a relief. And yet you're going to be stuck with, I'm not supposed to feel that way. It gets very complex because I think grief comes from a place of finality. If you have a falling out or a breakup or whatever, as long as a person's alive, there's always at least the hope or a possibility of things can be restored or reconciled or that type of stuff. But death has that finality of now I can't fix this.
As you've worked with people, or even let's say your own journey, there's so many words that people say when we're dealing with death and dying, or even when someone leaves. And I feel like people often say the wrong words to the person because they don't know what to say.
Right.
With dealing with all of the feelings and emotions, do you have any suggestions on that?
Yeah. This applies from my own personal internal work. And this is part of what I help people do because we do this internally as well. If somebody's dealing with grief, a friend trying to help, they try to logic the way through it and go, it's okay, they're in a better place, all that type of stuff. Logic doesn't make feelings go away. And so what I really seek to do is go, whatever you're feeling, tell me why you feel it. And just allow them, because I think that's part of what people need is an avenue to be able to work their way through it of going, okay, why do I feel what I feel? And I don't think they even give themselves that liberality to experience that. They end up just going, man, I still feel sad. I shouldn't feel sad anymore. Instead of going, okay, why do I feel sad? What am I feeling? This question gets back to that inner parent, inner child, because it's the inner child. Logic doesn't make the feelings go away. The inner child, in some essence, has to work their own way through the process. And I find that why question really helps.
Yeah. I'm laughing, not because this is funny, but because of why. Why? And that's always
Right.
what we seem to go back to is why.
And the hard part too is sometimes you may not even get an answer, but it gives permission for you to feel. And I don't think we're given that very much in life, that we're not given permission to just feel what we feel.
I think you just nailed that right there is we don't hold space for people and then we just trap it all inside of our bodies and you're very good at that's your practice, but you as a human and who you are very good at holding space for people and just allowing them to set before you even start speaking.
I was thinking about this. There's a cultural aspect in our society that we don't tend to see death as part of the cycle, that we do everything we can to avoid death. And there are other cultures that it's just, it's part of it. I don't know what culture it is, but I've heard of where there are certain people when they know that they're about to die, they go out into the wilderness, they lay down and they let nature and whatever consume them because that's, they don't fear it. They don't begrudge it. They just, that's part of it. And I think that's part of why grief is hard for us also, is because I think we don't have that in our society. We think we shouldn't die, or we fear death as well. And that gets into a whole nother aspect as well, which I think makes grief hard. I find this happening as well because all my grandparents are gone. My dad's passed away. Some of his siblings and some of my mom's siblings have passed away. And I'm like, that protective layer is going and eventually it's my turn. And I think that's where grief can get you too, is you fear your own mortality instead of just welcoming that and just being okay with life. So I think that's another factor in there as well.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up because that's something that we've talked about is when you lay your head down at night, are you afraid of dying?
Yeah.
Things have come up in my life. It's like, why can't I sleep? Well, am I afraid I'm going to die when I go to sleep?
Right.
And so I
Right.
can't sleep because I
Right.
it's then became, wait, am I afraid to die?
Right. I experienced the same thing. I was having some issues at night, and I'm like, and I basically just finally got to the point I'm going, what are you afraid of? And I was afraid of dying. And I'm like, well, then, but why am I afraid of dying even? If I can take it beyond that, am I afraid that what comes next is bad? So, I mean, and I think there's a part of that there's a part that won't ever go away because your body's natural instinct is to stay alive, is survival. And I don't think that part ever completely goes away. I think there's a lot of it, though, becomes more mental emotional that we fear what comes next.
Yeah, in every part of our lives. I have a mentor who says no one is getting out alive. She just flat out says it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
she's like, so start living because no one is getting out alive.
That's right. That may be another point as well. I think we grieve what we didn't do.
Yeah.
I think we grieve not being who we would desire to be. And so maybe that's even a factor too, that as somebody passes, I think maybe we fear not ever being who we truly want to be.
I think that point right there is really powerful because it comes up with other feelings and other
Mm-hmm.
things. But a lot of times is that are we truly living to who we want
Mm-hmm.
to be?
Right. I think most people are just surviving more than they are truly living.
Yeah.
That's something I'm challenging myself with of just I want to truly live. I want to live fully.
Yes. Joy is so much easier to talk about. People want to
Mm-hmm.
see people happy. They expect to see happy.
Right.
Once, even if you're not at the highest frequency, people are smiling, doing their things, living, but you
Mm-hmm.
can still have grief
Mm-hmm.
underneath there
Mm-hmm.
until it makes you stop. I feel like it forces people to a stopping point until they face it.
Yeah, I think sometimes again, this goes back to emotions aren't bad. If you never experience sadness, would joy be the same? Would it have the same intensity? I don't know.
Yeah.
For me, the biggest thing isn't the feelings, it's the behavior. Because I don't think we ever regret feelings. I think we regret behaviors.
Yes. And on that, when you work with people that are dealing with grief, I've seen anger, meanness, things like
Mm-hmm.
that come up. And it's just really going back, would you say, to those three questions of when did the
Mm-hmm.
anger start?
Right. Yeah. Because more likely than not, it started somewhere around where the loss was. And that's the best answer the brain could come up with for a protective mechanism. And most likely they were taught how to do that. Probably some parent was that way or parental figure.
Yeah. Why I'm doing this is I want to
Mhm.
normalize talking about our feelings, which is huge,
Right,
and
right.
talking about grief because
Mm-hmm.
I see it happen a lot. I've seen it come up in my own family
Mm-hmm.
and not be recognized for a couple years until after, and then
Right,
it totally stopped a person.
right.
And we don't look at people and say, "Oh my goodness, they're so happy. They're so
Mhm.
happy all the time." We don't question why people are happy.
Right.
So I think that a person can go on and be happy and then hit this wall. If we're going to talk about feelings, like how do we make it normal to the younger generations that it's okay?
Yeah. It has to start in childhood. We have got to, and there's a balance. The point isn't to let a child just scream and kick in a store without any type of effect. It's also, because you can't just let their feelings dominate their behavior. We have to find a way to help them work through it themselves. So if we teach the younger generation how to experience feelings, because I, again, go back to, we tend to make anger and sadness and anxiety bad things.
Mhm.
And if we can just help people realize these aren't bad, ultimately, it's just your body giving you information, is really ultimately what it comes down to. Because you either feel unsafe, you feel overwhelmed, or you feel, there was one other one I was thinking about. Anxiety comes when we feel unsafe or in danger. Sadness comes when we feel overwhelmed, and anger comes when we feel unprotected, which is similar to unsafe, but or anger is when we feel stuck or out of control. So if we can help kids realize why they're experiencing what they're experiencing and be able to walk them through it, now we're going to we're going to change things. Now, it's okay to feel emotions. It's what do you do with them that's really the key. And I think what parents are really trying to do is control the behavior without addressing the emotions, and it doesn't work. So I think we have to have a realization within our society.
Would you suggest, as people are doing that, start getting curious with kids? Why are you crying?
Okay.
Why are
Yeah.
what is making you feel this way? To have them start
Yes.
opening up and being aware.
Yes. Yeah. Because basically what you're doing is you're helping them answer that question and work their way through it. Because really what they're having is they're also having a communication issue. They don't know how to communicate what they're experiencing. And if you help them to realize what they're experiencing, now you're giving them an avenue to communicate.
What a gift to learn it young, to be able to
Yes.
speak and feel your feelings. And
Yeah.
I think
The
that's
trick
why,
is the parent has to learn it first, because if they weren't taught it, you're going to have to learn it so then you
yeah.
can teach your kids. So then it's easier for them to teach their kids. I think that's why it's hard for parents and why they're wanting to shut it down is because they're really seeing themselves reflected in their child and they don't like what they see.
Yeah. So interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just such a heavy topic. And,
Mm-hmm.
working with the hospital parties I do, even if their kids are alive, they're grieving.
Yes.
Their child is losing their childhood, stuck in the
Right.
hospital. And we've had kids who've passed away, and I've looked at it that way. And then, just losing my own family members. I just want to make it more normal to talk about our feelings and to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge how important it is to be able to say, I'm not okay,
Yes.
and to have someone truly hold space.
Mm-hmm. So now we're getting into your driving factor too, because you've seen a lot of
Yeah.
grief and you've seen a lot of pain, and you're wanting to create an avenue for people to heal.
Yes.
So you can take grief another step. Not only is grief the hardest emotion, it's hardest when it's the parent losing the child. There, I don't think there's anything harder. And in my office, I recently had a mom who brought her son in and he had a brain tumor and he passed. And it's so difficult to watch what she goes through and it's so painful. And I think the part logically we know it could occur,
Yes.
but emotionally we don't expect that. That's not the norm. That's not the typical. So not only are we not taught how to deal with emotions, but we're not taught how to deal with the unexpected grief. You don't tend to have a child and think, wow, in 8, 9, 10 years, they won't be around anymore. So that's hard. It is gut wrenching. It sucks the life out of you. It's not an easy pathway. So
Yes. And on that note, I want to ask you this. And I think this is why sometimes people avoid talking to them,
mhm.
not only because they don't know what to say, but because then we also feel it in our own bodies. I mean, not everybody
Yes.
does, but it's a lot of people
Yeah.
feel it. I'm very sensitive and I feel it in my own
Right.
body.
Right. Because
And
we imagine what it would be like for us to go through that, and we don't like
mhm,
that feeling, and so we try to avoid it. So yeah, I agree. Well, and I think you're left with such a helpless feeling too, because there's so little that a person can do, because nothing you can say is going to make it go away. Nothing you can say is going to change it. I think the most important thing we've talked about, you've said it this way, is giving them space to experience what they experience and giving them grace and giving them just love and just, you don't have to fix it. That's not the point. The point is just to care that they're going through what they're going through.
I think that's key right there is we're not going to be able to fix it. And we
Mhm.
often are always trying to fix things.
Mhm.
And if we fix it, then everything's going to be okay and everything's going to be better. But that's something that
Right.
we can't fix.
No, you can't. It's part of it. And I think it's important for us to embrace it instead of trying to make it go away. I had a thought this way, and I think it applies here. You either are seeking to escape life or embrace life. And I think it's important for us to learn to embrace the hard stuff. It's part of living. It's not good or bad. It just is. It's just
That's really good. It just is.
the most important thing is just being able to allow yourself to experience it, because that's to me it in a nutshell is we're not taught to experience emotions and to be able to walk our way through them as opposed to just making them go away. I find it really interesting because I use this analogy a lot. We have plenty of thoughts and feelings that just come and go. And the truth is, in a way, grief is the same thing. It's a thought and it's a feeling. We just aren't taught how to walk through it. Now, it's a bigger swamp or whatever, for lack of a better analogy, to walk through than just a small thing, but it is the same process. It is allowing it to pass through you as opposed to taking it on as your identity. And so if we can take that same concept, and there is no time, like you said too, there's no time frame on it. My mom and I talk about this a lot too, is when is it going to go away? That isn't the point. It's just, do you allow yourself to experience what you're experiencing without judgment? And I think that's my favorite part, because we've kind of talked about this too. When we say it's good or bad, that's judgment. And it's the judgment that's the issue. It's not the feeling.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that about what you and your mom talk about, because I think that's really powerful, is that you guys can talk about it
Mhm.
and acknowledge that it's never going to go away.
Right.
And at any point, we can stop and feel those feelings.
Mhm.
And there's no judgment on when they come up, where they come up. It could be a scent, a smell, a
Mhm.
vision, a thought, anything that brings
Yeah,
these back up. And,
absolutely.
we want to keep people alive even
Mhm.
after they're gone, and
Right.
be able to talk about the legacy they've left behind.
Right.
And so I think that if we can do this in a healthy way
Mhm.
and, talk about it, I just love that you guys are able to communicate it. Not surprised at all. And I want to thank you for coming on, because the
Mhm.
reason I invited you on is not only have you helped me deal with my own grief, but it is such a huge part of what you do and your work is to talk about feelings as a whole and what they're
Mhm.
doing to the body, and when we push
Mhm.
them down in our body and don't feel our
Right.
feelings.
Right. I personally think that's where most, if not all, dis-ease comes from. That it's you're either in some state of fight or flight, or you're in heal and repair. And it's, if you stop emotions, that's a stress. You're creating tension by stopping the emotion, by not walking through it. Now it becomes an under stress undercurrent that's there all the time. And so by being able to walk through these feelings, and now we can heal and repair from those feelings, we move forward, it just becomes part of our story as opposed to a block or an anchor.
Yeah. I want to ask you a question if you're okay sharing this.
Yeah.
As you talk about your dad, you and your mom talk about your dad,
Mhm.
what's a happy thought or funny thought that's left behind?
It's funny you asked that, because I was actually thinking about this a day or two ago, and I'm going, I already mentioned that my dad had a hard time showing emotions or showing affection. And so it's weird, because one of the things that my dad would do is he'd come up behind me and kind of get a knuckle, and he'd kind of thunk it across my head, or just kind of, rub it across. And I can think back on that both as I didn't like the pain, and it's a fond memory, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
That was his way of trying to connect. That was his way of trying to express affection. It's funny because I could think back with it almost with fondness, even though I'm like, I didn't necessarily like it at the time.
Yeah.
It just makes me laugh now. And I'm like, that's the stuff that I think when you walk through it in a healthy way, you can look back on that stuff and it's less pain. I mean, I can look back and go, if I could have my choice, I would have preferred we had a healthier connection. It's not going to change. So, you've heard me say this phrase too, the past without emotion is wisdom. How do I squeeze all the wisdom and I can see it for what it really was? Because at the time, I'm like, stop. I don't like that. That hurts. Now I can see it for, you were just trying to make a connection. You didn't know how, and that's the only way you knew how. And so now it doesn't hurt. It's not painful. It's just, okay, you struggled with it. I get it. It's not about me. It's about what your struggle was. And so now I don't grieve the relationship. I accept it for what it was. And okay, so let's get a little weird. One of the things that I do personally, because I think one of the things that's difficult with grief is we don't have that conversation. I talk to dead people,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, because
Yeah.
I think whether they actually hear whether it doesn't really matter, because I think it's a way for us personally to process through.
Mhm.
And I verbalize out loud some of these things even after they're past, because even if it's imaginary, it's a way for me to work through that conversation that I was never able to have before. And like I said, I think that's one of the hardest parts of grief, is that we were never able to have the communication we would have wanted. And this is a way to go, okay, this is how I'm going to do it now. And so I have found it's helped alleviate a lot of the grief feelings, is to have those conversations.
I love how you just said that because grief is such a heavy topic. And so I want to bring
Mhm.
some light to it too. That's why I asked you
Mhm.
about your dad. And when you said I talk to dead people, that's a good, I mean, it's funny. It's weird to hear people say that, but also it's not
Right.
weird to me because I see something and I'm like, oh, thank you, Grandma. Like,
Right.
or I say something like that out loud or,
Right.
and, in my head because I think and also if you face something that was uncomfortable. Like we're never going to get those conversations back, but if we speak
Mhm.
them out loud, we're getting them out of our body and out of our system, and
Right.
it does our own self a lot of good to get it out of us.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's interesting. It's not funny that, when you say that people laugh, like I talk to dead people, you talk
Right.
to dead people?
I even think about this. I'm going, they're not truly dead. Now, I mean, we're
Right.
going to open up a whole can of worms with spiritual thoughts and all
Yeah.
that. But I'm
Yeah.
like, even if they're just alive in your memory, then they're still alive.
Yes.
So you're
Yeah.
not really talking to a dead person, if that makes sense. Yeah, their body may be dead, but that's what I think about. My own personal belief is I know that there's something beyond just this physical body that continues on. So I'm not really talking to a dead person. I'm just talking to a transformed person, is really what it
Yes.
comes down to. He's in a different state than I am, and we haven't figured out how to hear back yet. And if we want to keep diving weird, I think there's an intuitive aspect that whether it's me knowing what they would have said or whether it's actually them saying it, I think we can hear back if we open ourselves up to
I agree with you. People might think this is getting a little weird, but you know what? Grief is weird,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's honestly what we talk about all the time is
Right.
the things that aren't talked about.
Well, yeah. And the other part with it too is very few, if any, have been there and come back. So nobody knows what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And until you actually go through it, how would you know what you're dealing with? So we're just experiencing one side of, grief is our way of dealing with this side of death. We don't know what the other side looks like.
Yeah, very, very true.
So
Yeah.
did you think this conversation would go that weird? Not
That's
surprised, are you?
no, I'm not. As I have you on here, I want to thank you for coming on and talking
Mhm.
about grief and just
Right.
helping me make it feel more comfortable because that is what
Mhm.
I'm doing this for. I also want to bring laughs to it because if we can't laugh about it and get it, then we really need to work on it even more. Like it has to
Right.
come out, and
Right.
laughter is a way of getting things to come out.
I think it's part of the grieving process. I'll give you another story that to me is funny. So my dad had colon cancer, and so he when he was in his last weeks, days, whatever, we would all of us, especially my siblings, we would go over there and we'd stay pretty late. And we were over there one night, and I don't know what we got to talk about, but somebody took because my aunts would come over, they'd have to care for him, and they had the medical gloves, and somebody put it on, blew it up really high, and we were just laughing and having a great time. And it's funny how that ties together, because I think laughter is part of grieving as well. One of my favorite things about, as you're grieving, you tend to let go a lot of the bad stuff. We tend to remember the fond things, because those are what matter. And I think there's a healthy aspect to grief too, because it helps us see what's important.
Before we end, I want to just tell you that I think that's interesting that you brought that up because if you do get the time to spend with someone before they die, I think that is where the laughter can come in instead of like a tragic experience.
Right.
It's almost like a good feeling of closure. It just makes everything feel so much at ease and almost let everybody
Mhm.
know it's at peace.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have a really cool story that, uh, for me, it's kind of my closing story, because you know, take into account what I experienced with my dad's passing had one of the coolest things I've ever heard. That, in the last couple of days, he was basically just comatose. He wasn't responsive to anything. And we were all there, and we could tell he was getting close because, the breathing changed, the heart rate changed, and all that. And this is one thing that does bring tears to my eyes, because my dad's last moment, he turned his head, he kissed my mom, and he passed away. So he got to say goodbye to the most important person to him. And I thought, wow, that, because not everybody gets that. You mentioned some people, it's tragedy and they don't get that chance. But I got to see somebody say goodbye in what I would consider a really healthy way. And so that's something that I will cherish the rest of my life, is seeing that he went out in peace. I grieve his passing, and yet I also cherish it as well.
Yeah.
So I think if you can embrace all the aspects of grief, that's how you heal, and it just becomes part of your story.
Thank you. That gave me chills when you shared that.
Mm-hmm.
What a special moment
Mm-hmm.
to just be present in that. I want to thank you for coming on. Can you tell people where they can find you at?
You can find me at Docere Life Center. We have a web page at docerelifecenter.com. I'm also working on my own. That'll be drcraigfarney.com. I've got some podcast episodes called Mind Shift. You can find me there. I would say I'm on Facebook, but I have like 3 or 4 accounts that got all screwed up, and my personals with my business, and I'm really working to get that straightened out. But the best place to find me is look me up on docerelifecenter.com. And then if you want to come in for a consult and talk about it, give our office a call. I'll be more than happy to help in any way I can.
Thank you. And I will leave those in the show notes.
Yeah. And I'm going to give a shout out to you. This girl is something special. She has a very special heart, and you don't give yourself enough credit for the difference you make. Though I've not experienced it personally, I know you make a huge change and a huge difference in what people in the hospital experience, that I know without you, it would be even harder. And so I know you bring light into a very hard, dark place. And so I salute you.
Thank you. I received that. You weren't supposed to make me cry on my own podcast.
That's my job. You know that.
Yes. Thanks for coming on, Dr. Farney.
Yeah.
He caught me off guard there, you guys. Honestly, that's what he does best. He holds space for everybody. I just want to thank everybody for listening to this episode, and just reflecting back on what he said is just really, asking yourself those questions. And when you see it in someone else, like allowing them just the space they need without judgment, is probably one of the most powerful things we can do.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for sharing your information and doing what you do best, feeling your feelings on all levels.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Dr. Craig Farney for coming on and just reflecting and giving us some great questions. I will leave all of his links in the show notes. So thank you for listening in, and I hope you love this conversation as much as I did with Dr. Farney. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. I hope today's story inspired you to embrace your own journey of growth and change. Remember, transformation isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave a review. If you found something that sparked you in this episode and may spark a friend, I encourage you to go share it with them. If you have your own story you would like to share, I would love to hear it, so please reach out to me. Until next time, friends, go have some fun and let those sparks fly.